Judge Linda Morrison poured herself a second cup of coffee that Tuesday morning. She had 4 cases on the docket, and honestly, none of them looked particularly complicated. A few traffic violations, a shoplifting case, and 1 burglary. Just another regular day in the county courthouse. She walked into her courtroom right at 9 o'clock, carrying her coffee and a stack of files. The bailiff called everyone to order, and Linda settled into her chair behind the bench. She'd been doing this job for almost 15 years now, and she had a routine down. Read the case summary, listen to both sides, make a fair decision. Simple as that. First case, the bailiff announced. State of Ohio versus Christopher Hayes. Burglary in the 2nd degree. Linda opened the file and started skimming through it while the defendant was being brought in from the holding area. A 43-year-old man accused of breaking into a pawn shop. Security footage. Witness statement from the owner. Prior record of petty crimes from years back. Seemed pretty straightforward. The prosecutor was asking for high bail, probably hoping to pressure a guilty plea. She heard the side door open and the shuffle of feet. Without looking up, she continued reading the charges. Breaking and entering. Attempted theft. The defendant allegedly climbed through a back window around 2 in the morning and tried to grab some jewelry before the silent alarm went off. Remove the restraints, Linda said absently, still reading. There was something about the evidence list that seemed thin. No fingerprints mentioned, no DNA evidence, just grainy security camera footage and the shop owner's statement. She heard the click of handcuffs being removed and finally looked up. The man standing at the defense table was tall and thin, wearing an orange jumpsuit that hung loose on his frame. His hair was cut short and starting to gray at the temples. He kept his head down, shoulders hunched like he was trying to make himself smaller. Then he lifted his head to look at the judge, and Linda's heart stopped. She knew that face. She knew those brown eyes, that nose that had been broken when he was 12 and never set quite right. She knew the small mole on his left cheek and the way his ears stuck out just a little too far. Christopher Hayes. Chris Hayes. Her Chris from Jefferson, middle school. Linda's hand froze halfway to her coffee cup. For a moment, she forgot how to breathe. The courtroom seemed to tilt sideways, and she had to grip the edge of the bench to steady herself. They'd been neighbors for 6 years, from the time she was 10 until she turned 16. They'd lived in the same apartment building in the roughest part of town, where gunshots at night were so common nobody even called the cops anymore. Chris lived 2 floors down with his mom and 3 younger sisters. His dad had left when Chris was 8, and his mom worked double shifts at a nursing home just to keep the lights on. Linda's family hadn't been much better off. Her dad drove a delivery truck and her mom cleaned houses. They had food on the table, but just barely. There were months when they had to choose between paying the electric bill or the phone bill. She and Chris had been inseparable back then. They'd walk to school together every morning, do homework in the building's laundry room because it was the only quiet place, and dream about getting out someday, really getting out, not just talking about it like everyone else did. Chris was the one who'd encouraged her to apply for the scholarship program at the magnet high school across town. He'd helped her fill out the application, practicing her interview answers with her for weeks. When she got accepted, he was more excited than she was. She remembered him spinning her around in the parking lot, both of them laughing until their sides hurt. That was the last good memory she had of him. She'd gone to the new school, and everything changed. She met different people, got involved in debate team and student government, started thinking about college. She'd drift back to the old neighborhood less and less. Chris had stayed at the local high school and their paths just stopped crossing. By the time Linda graduated and left for college on a full scholarship, she hadn't seen Chris in almost 2 years. She'd heard through the grapevine that he'd dropped out of school to work full-time when his mom got sick. After that, she'd lost track completely. She'd been so focused on moving forward, on building a better life, that she'd never looked back. 27 years. It had been 27 years since she'd last seen him. Your Honor, the prosecutor's voice snapped her back to reality. Shall we proceed? Linda blinked and realized everyone was staring at her. Her face felt hot. Yes, she managed to say, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. Please continue. The prosecutor, a woman named Patricia Delgado, launched into her opening statement. The defendant had been caught on camera, she said. The pawn shop owner had positively identified him. He had a criminal history, minor stuff, but it showed a pattern. 2 DUIs from years ago, 1 charge of petty theft that got dismissed. Some unpaid traffic tickets. Linda forced herself to look at Chris again. Really look at him. He looked so much older than 43. His face was weathered and lined, his hands rough and calloused. He was thinner than she remembered, like he hadn't been eating well. His clothes under the jumpsuit, what she could see of them, were worn and faded. What had happened to him? Where had life taken the boy who used to help her with algebra and share his lunch when her family was short on money? The public defender, a young man who barely looked old enough to shave, stood up to present Chris's side. His client pleaded not guilty, he said. The evidence was circumstantial. His client had been in the area that night but hadn't broken into anything. He'd been walking home from his job as a night janitor at a warehouse 3 blocks away. Wrong place, wrong time. Linda's mind was racing. She should stop this right now. She should tell everyone that she knew the defendant, that they had history, and excuse herself from the case. That was the rule. Judges couldn't preside over cases where they knew the people involved. It wasn't fair to anyone, but something stopped her from speaking up. Maybe it was the way Chris kept his eyes down, like he'd already accepted defeat before the trial even started. Maybe it was the memory of a 12-year-old boy helping his neighbor girl believe she could be more than her circumstances. Maybe it was the fact that she'd spent her entire career trying to make sure people got fair treatment in court, and she had a nagging feeling that something about this case wasn't adding up. She looked at the evidence summary again. Security camera footage, but the report said it was grainy and dark. The timestamp showed 2:47 a.m. The shop owner's statement said he'd reviewed the footage and identified the defendant, but where was the technical analysis? Where were the measurements comparing the person in the video to the defendant's actual height and build? And why were there no fingerprints? If someone broke in through a window, there should be prints somewhere. On the windowsill, on the display cases somewhere. I'm calling a short recess, Linda announced suddenly. 15 minutes. Both attorneys, I want to see you in my chambers immediately. She stood up quickly, not looking at anyone, especially not at Chris. Her legs felt shaky as she walked to her private office. Inside, she closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. She shouldn't be doing this. She should recuse herself right now. Hand this case to another judge and walk away. That was the smart thing to do. The professional thing to do. But Linda had learned a long time ago that the smart thing and the right thing weren't always the same. She sat down at her desk and pulled up the case file on her computer. She started reading through everything carefully, looking for details she might have missed. The arrest report, the evidence log, the witness statements, everything. And that's when she started seeing the holes, little inconsistencies that didn't quite add up. Questions that should have been asked but weren't. Procedures that should have been followed but seemed to be skipped. There was a knock on her door. "Come in," she called out. Both attorneys filed in, looking nervous. They probably thought they'd done something wrong. "Sit down," Linda said, gesturing to the chairs in front of her desk. "We need to talk about this case, and I need to tell you both something that might change everything." She took a deep breath. What she was about to do could end her career if she handled it wrong. But if she stayed silent, an innocent man might go to prison, or worse, a guilty man might go free because the investigation was sloppy. Either way, she couldn't just walk away. Not from this. Not from him. Not after everything they'd been through together, even if he didn't remember her anymore. Linda looked at the 2 attorneys sitting across from her desk. Patricia Delgado, the prosecutor, sat with her arms crossed, clearly annoyed at the interruption. The young public defender, whose name was Kevin Chen, looked like he might throw up from nervousness. He couldn't have been out of law school for more than a year or 2. "I need to disclose something to both of you," Linda began, choosing her words carefully. "Something that could be grounds for me to recuse myself from this case." Patricia uncrossed her arms and leaned forward. Kevin's eyes went wide. "I know the defendant," Linda continued. "We grew up in the same neighborhood. We were friends as kids. I haven't seen or spoken to him in 27 years, but I wanted to put that on the record before we proceed any further." There was a moment of silence. Patricia recovered first. "Well, then you should recuse yourself, Your Honor. This is clearly a conflict of interest." Linda had expected that response. "Perhaps," she said. "But before I make that decision, I want both of you to look at something with me." She turned her computer monitor so they could both see it. "I've been reviewing the evidence in this case, and I have some concerns. Serious concerns about whether proper procedures were followed." Patricia's face hardened. Your Honor, with all due respect, the evidence is solid. We have video footage and an eyewitness identification. Let me show you what I mean, Linda said, pulling up the evidence log. The security footage shows someone breaking in at 2:47 a.m. The timestamp is clear. But look at this. She clicked to another document. The arrest report says Mr. Hayes was picked up at 3:15 a.m. walking on Madison Avenue, 6 blocks away from the pawn shop. Right, Patricia said.
He was fleeing the scene. Walking, Linda emphasized.
Not running, just walking. At 3:15 in the morning, 28 minutes after the break-in, only 6 blocks away. Does that make sense to you? If you just broke into a store and the alarm went off, would you casually walk 6 blocks in half an hour? That's barely 2 blocks every 10 minutes. Kevin was scribbling notes frantically. Patricia's jaw tightened. And here's another thing, Linda continued. The responding officers noted that Mr. Hayes was wearing a dark blue work jacket with a name patch on it. Winston Warehouse. He told them he'd just gotten off his night shift. Did anyone verify that? Patricia shuffled through her papers. I'll have to check with the detective. You should, Linda said. Because if he really was working that night, there would be time cards, maybe security footage at the warehouse. That's basic investigation work. She pulled up another document. And look at this evidence report. No fingerprints recovered from the scene. None. Not on the window frame. Not on the display cases that were supposedly tampered with. Nothing. The perpetrator could have worn gloves, Patricia argued, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. Could have, Linda agreed, but the security footage description says the suspect's hands were visible and appeared to be bare. So where are the prints? Kevin spoke up for the first time, his voice shaky but determined. Your Honor, I didn't catch that. I should have, but this is my first criminal trial and I've been overwhelmed with cases. I have 43 active files right now. Linda felt a pang of sympathy for the kid. She remembered being a public defender, drowning in cases, never having enough time to do the job right. That's exactly why I'm bringing this up now, she said gently. Before this goes any further, she turned back to Patricia. I want to see the actual security footage, not screenshots, the full video. And I want a report from the warehouse confirming whether Mr. Hayes was working that night. And I want to know why Detective Morrison didn't pull footage from other businesses in the area. There are at least 4 other shops on that block with security cameras. Patricia stood up, her face flushed. Your Honor, are you accusing me of prosecutorial misconduct? I'm not accusing anyone of anything, Linda said firmly. I'm saying there are gaps in this investigation that need to be filled before we proceed. That's not misconduct. That's just incomplete work. And it needs to be completed. Fine, Patricia said stiffly. I'll get you everything you're asking for. But I still think you should recuse yourself if you have a personal connection to the defendant. Linda considered this for a long moment. Everything in her training said Patricia was right. The ethical thing, the safe thing, was to step aside and let another judge handle it. But she also knew what would happen if she did that. This case would get passed to someone else who wouldn't look as closely. Kevin, overwhelmed and inexperienced, wouldn't catch these problems. Chris would probably take a plea deal just to avoid the risk of trial, even if he was innocent. Here's what I'm going to do, Linda said finally. I'm going to disclose my prior relationship with the defendant in open court. Mr. Hayes has the right to request a different judge if he wants one. If he does, I'll recuse myself immediately. But if he's willing to have me continue, and if neither of you objects after I've disclosed everything, then I'm going to see this case through properly. She looked directly at Patricia, and I'm going to make sure the investigation is thorough and complete before anyone makes any decisions about guilt or innocence. Is that clear? Patricia nodded curtly. Kevin looked like he might cry from relief. Good, Linda said. We'll reconvene in court in 5 minutes. Get your files in order. After they left, Linda sat alone in her office for a moment. Her hands were trembling slightly. She'd just put her entire career on a knife's edge. If anyone complained to the Judicial Review Board, she could be sanctioned or even removed from the bench. Judges weren't supposed to go digging into cases like this. They were supposed to be neutral referees, not investigators. But Linda had become a judge for a reason. She believed in justice, real justice, not just the assembly line processing of cases that happened too often in overloaded courts. And she couldn't ignore what she'd seen. Too many holes, too many shortcuts, too much potential for an innocent man to be convicted just because nobody bothered to do the work properly. She stood up and smoothed down her robe. Time to face the courtroom again. Time to face Chris and tell him who she was. Walking back into the courtroom felt like walking through water. Everything seemed to move in slow motion. She took her seat at the bench and looked out at the faces staring back at her. Chris was still standing at the defense table, his expression confused and worried. "Before we continue with this case," Linda began, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest, "I need to make a disclosure for the record." The court reporter's fingers flew over her machine. Everyone leaned forward slightly. "I have a prior relationship with the defendant," Linda said clearly. "Mr. Hayes and I grew up in the same neighborhood. We were friends as children and teenagers. I have not had any contact with him for approximately 27 years. However, in the interest of full transparency, I'm putting this on the record now." She could see the shock register on Chris's face. He was staring at her now, really looking at her, and she saw the moment recognition dawned. His mouth opened slightly. His eyes went wide. "Linda?" he said softly. And even though it had been nearly 3 decades, she would have known his voice anywhere. "Mr. Hayes," Linda said formally, though her throat felt tight. "You have the right to request a different judge if you believe I cannot be impartial in your case. I want you to understand that right clearly. You can have a different judge assigned and there will be no penalty for making that request." Chris looked at his attorney, then back at Linda. For a long moment he didn't say anything, then he shook his head slowly. "No," he said, "I don't want a different judge. If you're willing to hear my case, Your Honor, then I'd like you to do it." Linda felt something loosen in her chest. "Very well. Do either of the attorneys have any objections?" Kevin immediately shook his head. Patricia stood up, clearly frustrated but trapped. "No objection, Your Honor," she said through gritted teeth. "Then we'll proceed," Linda said. "But before we do, I'm ordering additional investigation. Ms. Delgado, I want the full security footage from the pawn shop delivered to this court within 48 hours. I want verification of Mr. Hayes' employment and his work schedule for the night in question. And I want security footage from every business within 2 blocks of the pawn shop that has cameras." Patricia's face went pale. "Your Honor, that could take weeks to gather." "Then you'd better get started," Linda said. "This case is continued for 3 weeks to allow time for proper investigation. Mr. Hayes, what's the current bail situation?" $50,000, Your Honor, Kevin said. "He can't afford it?" Linda looked at Chris, really looked at him. He was standing straighter now, a tiny spark of hope in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Bail is reduced to $5,000, Linda announced, with the requirement that Mr. Hayes check in with pretrial services twice a week. If he can post bond, he'll be released pending trial." "Your Honor," Patricia objected. "The defendant is a flight risk." "The defendant has lived in this community his entire life," Linda countered. "And I'm not convinced the evidence against him is as strong as you seem to think it is. Bail is set at $5,000. We're adjourned." She brought down her gavel and it was done. For better or worse, she'd made her choice. 3 days after the hearing, Linda was in her office reviewing case files when her clerk knocked on the door. "Judge Morrison, there's someone here to see you. He says it's about the Hayes case." Linda looked up from her computer. "Who is it?" "A detective. Harold Webb. He says it's urgent." Linda felt her stomach tighten. Detective Webb was the one who'd handled Chris's arrest. She'd seen his name all over the police reports. "Send him in." The man who walked through her door was in his mid-50s with gray hair and tired eyes. He wasn't wearing his uniform, just jeans and a jacket. That was the first thing that struck Linda as odd. "Judge Morrison," he said, closing the door behind him. "Thank you for seeing me without an appointment." "What's this about, detective?" He sat down without being invited, which was the second odd thing. "I'm here off the record. What I'm about to tell you could cost me my job, maybe my pension, but I can't stay quiet anymore." Linda set down her pen. "I'm listening." "The Hayes case," Webb said. "It's not what it looks like. I mean, the arrest is legitimate, but the investigation was rushed. Really rushed, and I think I know why." "Go on." Webb rubbed his face with both hands. "The pawn shop owner, Pete Gallagher, he's been having money problems for years. The store is barely staying afloat. About 6 months ago, he took out a huge insurance policy on his inventory, way more than the stuff in his shop is actually worth." Linda felt her pulse quicken. "You think he staged the break-in?" "I think it's possible," Webb said carefully. More than possible. When I responded to the call that night, something felt wrong. The back window was broken from the outside, yeah, but there was hardly any glass on the inside floor. Most of it was outside, like someone had pushed it out from inside the building, not smashed it from outside. Did you put that in your report? Webb looked down at his hands. No. My sergeant told me to keep it simple, said we had a suspect, we had video, case closed, he wanted it wrapped up fast. Why are you telling me this now? Because I saw what you did in court, Webb said. You actually looked at the evidence. You asked the questions I should have asked. And then I started thinking about Chris Hayes. I know him, Judge. Not well, but I've seen him around the neighborhood for years. He works hard, keeps his head down, stays out of trouble. He's not the kind of guy who breaks into stores. Linda leaned back in her chair. What else did you find? I went back and looked at the security footage myself. Really looked at it, frame by frame. The person in that video is about 5'9", maybe 5'10". Chris Hayes is 6'2". The guy in the video is also heavier, stockier build. Hayes is thin. I don't think it's him at all. Why didn't you notice this before? Webb's face flushed. Because I didn't look carefully enough. Because my sergeant was breathing down my neck to close cases. Because I was lazy and took the easy answer. He looked up at her. But that's not good enough. That's not what I became a cop to do. Linda stood up and walked to her window. Detective Webb, what you're telling me is that an innocent man was arrested, and your department either missed or ignored evidence that would clear him. Yes, ma'am. That's exactly what I'm telling you. And you're willing to testify to this? There was a long pause. If I have to, yes. But I'm hoping it doesn't come to that. I'm hoping you can use what I've told you to get the prosecutor to look at this case again. Really look at it. Linda turned to face him. I'm going to need you to write all of this down, every detail. And I need you to go back and do the investigation you should have done the first time. Check the warehouse where Hayes was working. Pull footage from the other businesses on that street. Measure the person in the security video and compare it to Hayes' actual height. Do it right. Webb nodded slowly. I can do that. But Judge, there's something else you should know. What? Pete Gallagher has connections. His brother-in-law is Councilman Rodriguez. I think that's why my sergeant was so eager to close this case quickly. Political pressure. Linda felt a wave of anger wash over her. This was exactly the kind of corruption that made people lose faith in the justice system. Thank you for coming forward, Detective. It took courage. After Webb left, Linda sat down and tried to process everything. If what he said was true, this was bigger than just one case. This was about a police department cutting corners, a business owner committing fraud, and an innocent man almost going to prison because nobody wanted to rock the boat. She picked up her phone and called Patricia Delgado. The prosecutor answered on the third ring. We need to talk, Linda said. About the Hayes case. Are you in your office? 20 minutes later, Linda was sitting across from Patricia in the prosecutor's office. She'd brought Detective Webb's preliminary statement with her. You need to read this, Linda said, sliding the papers across the desk. Patricia read in silence, her expression growing darker with each page. When she finished, she looked up at Linda with a mix of anger and embarrassment. This is a mess. It's worse than a mess, Linda said. If Detective Webb is right, we almost put an innocent man in prison. And if the pawn shop owner really did commit insurance fraud, he's still out there, free to do it again. Patricia stood up and paced to her window. I should have looked closer. I should have questioned the evidence, but I had a confession from the shop owner, video footage, and a defendant with a prior record. It seemed solid. I know, Linda said. And I'm not here to blame you. But we need to fix this. Now, what do you want me to do? Drop the charges against Hayes, today, and open an investigation into Pete Gallagher. Get a warrant for his financial records, his insurance policies, everything. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. If I do this and it turns out Hayes really was guilty, I'm going to look like an idiot. My boss will have my head. And if you don't do this and an innocent man goes to prison, how will you sleep at night? Linda asked quietly. Patricia closed her eyes. You're right. Damn it, you're right. She sat back down at her desk and started typing on her computer. I'll file the motion to dismiss within the hour, and I'll talk to the detective division about investigating Gallagher. Thank you, Linda said. Don't thank me yet, Patricia replied. This is going to blow up into a huge scandal. The councilman's going to be furious. The police department is going to push back. It's going to get ugly. Let it get ugly, Linda said, standing up. The truth matters more than keeping people comfortable. 2 days later, Linda was back in her courtroom. Chris was there with Kevin, his public defender. Patricia stood at the prosecutor's table looking like she hadn't slept much. Your Honor, Patricia began. The state moves to dismiss all charges against Christopher Hayes. After further investigation, we have determined that the evidence does not support the charges filed. Linda looked at Chris. He was staring at Patricia like he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. His hands were gripping the edge of the defense table, his knuckles white. Mr. Hayes, Linda said gently, do you understand what this means? All charges against you are being dropped. You're free to go. Chris's eyes filled with tears. He nodded, unable to speak. Motion granted, Linda said, bringing down her gavel. Mr. Hayes, you're free to leave. I apologize on behalf of this court for what you've been through. As the courtroom emptied, Chris remained standing at the defense table like his legs couldn't quite figure out how to move. Kevin patted him on the shoulder and left, giving him space. Linda stepped down from the bench and walked over to where Chris stood. It was probably not appropriate, probably breaking about a dozen rules of judicial conduct, but she didn't care. Chris, she said softly. He looked up at her, tears streaming down his face. Linda, I can't believe it. I can't believe you did this. You didn't do it, Linda said simply. You didn't deserve to be punished for something you didn't do. But you risked everything for me. I heard people talking. They're saying you could get in trouble for how you handled this case. Linda smiled. Let them talk. I did what was right. That's all that matters. Chris wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. You remember that promise we made? On the swings behind our building? That we'd get out, that we'd make something of ourselves? I remember. You kept that promise, he and Chris said. You really did it. You became somebody, and you know what? Even though I didn't make it the way we planned, seeing you up there today, fighting for what's right, that felt like we both made it. Like that promise wasn't for nothing. Linda felt her own eyes getting wet. It was never for nothing, Chris. And this isn't over yet. We still need to make sure the person who actually committed this crime is held accountable. The pawn shop guy? Yes. Detective Webb is building a case against him right now. But Chris, I need to ask you something. What happened after I left for college? What happened to you? Chris looked down. That's a long story. Maybe one I can tell you over coffee sometime. If you're allowed to have coffee with someone who used to be a defendant in your court. Linda laughed, surprising herself. I think we can bend the rules just this once. Linda met Chris at a small coffee shop 3 blocks from the courthouse. It was a Thursday afternoon, and she'd taken a rare break from her packed schedule. She spotted him sitting in a corner booth staring out the window. He looked different in regular clothes, more like the person she remembered, just older and more worn down by life. Hey, she said, sliding into the seat across from him. Chris looked up and smiled, but it was a tired smile. Hey yourself. Thanks for coming. I wasn't sure you actually would. I said I would, didn't I? Linda signaled the waitress and ordered a coffee. So 27 years. That's a lot of time to catch up on. Chris laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. Yeah, where do I even start? Start wherever you want, Linda said gently. He was quiet for a moment, running his finger along the edge of his coffee cup. You remember when you left for that fancy high school? The magnet school across town? Of course. That was when everything started falling apart for me, Chris said. Not because of you leaving. That wasn't your fault. You deserved that opportunity. But my mom got sick that same year. Really sick. Lupus. She couldn't work anymore, and we had 3 kids at home still. My sisters were only 10, 8, and 6. Linda felt her chest tighten. I didn't know. I'm sorry. How could you know? We lost touch. Chris took a sip of his coffee. I dropped out of school when I was 17. Had to work full-time to keep the lights on and food on the table. I got a job at a factory. working the night shift because it paid a little more. My mom died 2 years later. I was 19. Chris, I'm so sorry. He shrugged, but she could see the pain in his eyes. It is what it is. After she died, I became the legal guardian for my sisters. I was barely an adult myself trying to raise 3 kids. I did the best I could, but it was hard. Really hard. I worked 60, 70 hours a week sometimes. The girls raised themselves more than I raised them, honestly. Where are they now? For the first time, Chris's smile reached his eyes. They're good. They're all doing really good, actually. Rachel is a nurse in Cleveland. Amy is a teacher here in town. And Jade just finished her master's degree in social work. They all turned out better than I ever could have hoped. Because of you, Linda said. Because you sacrificed for them. Maybe, Chris said, but I paid a price for it. I was so focused on survival, on making sure they had what they needed, that I never built anything for myself. Never went back to school. Never learned a real trade. Just bounced from one low-paying job to another. And somewhere along the way, I started drinking too much. Got 2 DUIs about 15 years ago. That's the prior record the prosecutor kept talking about. But you cleaned up? Yeah, I've been sober for 12 years now. After my youngest sister graduated high school, I finally had time to think about my own life. Realized I was headed nowhere good. Got help, stopped drinking, tried to turn things around. But when you've got a record and no education, doors don't exactly fly open for you. Linda listened, her heart aching for what he'd been through. The boy she'd known had been so smart, so full of potential, and life had just beaten him down over and over. The night I got arrested, Chris continued, I was walking home from my night shift at the warehouse. I do custodial work there. It's not much, but it's honest work, and they gave me a chance despite my record. I was literally just walking home, thinking about how I needed to pick up milk in the morning, when the cops pulled up and grabbed me. It must have been terrifying. Terrifying doesn't even cover it, Chris said. I kept telling them I didn't do anything, but they wouldn't listen. They kept saying they had me on video, that I should just confess and make it easier on myself. I spent 3 days in jail before the bail hearing. 3 days thinking my entire life was over. Again. The waitress brought Linda's coffee. After she left, Linda reached across the table and put her hand over Chris's. I'm sorry you went through that. And I'm sorry it took me recognizing you for someone to actually look at the evidence properly. That shouldn't be how justice works. But that's exactly how it works for people like me, Chris said quietly. Poor people. People with records, people who can't afford good lawyers. We get chewed up by the system all the time. I'm just lucky that the judge who got my case happened to be someone who remembered when I was a good kid with dreams. Linda pulled her hand back and wrapped it around her coffee cup. Chris, I need to tell you something. After I left the neighborhood, I never looked back. I never tried to find you or anyone else from those days. I was so focused on moving forward that I didn't want to think about where I came from. That's understandable. No, it's not, Linda said. Or maybe it is, but it wasn't right. I could have reached out. I could have stayed in touch. I chose not to because it was easier for me, and I'm sorry for that. Chris was quiet for a moment. You don't owe me an apology, Linda. You got out. That's what we both wanted. Just because I didn't make it doesn't mean you did anything wrong. But you did make it, Linda said firmly. You raised 3 kids by yourself. You got sober. You kept working even when things were hard. You didn't commit a crime even when you were desperate. That takes more strength than anything I ever did. Chris's eyes got shiny. I appreciate you saying that. I really do. They sat in silence for a moment, drinking their coffee. Outside, people walked by on the sidewalk. Everyone caught up in their own lives and problems. So what happens now? Chris asked. With the pawn shop guy? Detective Webb is building a case against Pete Gallagher, Linda said. He's pulled the financial records and they're pretty damning. Gallagher was about to lose his business. He took out a massive insurance policy 3 months before the break-in. The insurance company is investigating too. He's going to be charged with fraud and filing a false police report. Good, Chris said. He almost ruined my life to save his business. There's more, Linda said. The whole thing is turning into a bigger scandal. The police department is under investigation for how they handled your case. Detective Webb is cooperating with internal affairs. And Councilman Rodriguez, Gallagher's brother-in-law, is facing questions about whether he tried to influence the investigation. Chris whistled low. All that from one case? All that from people finally doing their jobs properly, Linda corrected. Chris, I want to ask you something. What are your plans now? What do you want to do? He shrugged. Same thing I've been doing, I guess. Work at the warehouse, pay my bills, try to stay out of trouble, maybe save up enough to get a better apartment eventually. Is that what you want, though? Or is that just what you think is possible? Chris looked at her with confusion. What do you mean? Linda leaned forward. I mean, you're 43 years old. You're smart. You're responsible. You've overcome more obstacles than most people face in a lifetime. Don't you want more than just surviving? Of course I do, Chris said. But Linda, I'm a middle-aged guy with a GED and a criminal record. I'm not going to become a doctor or a lawyer or anything like that. Maybe not, Linda agreed. But there are programs, resources. I volunteer with an organization that helps people who've been involved with the justice system get training and education. Trade schools, certificate programs, things like that. You could learn HVAC repair, electrical work, plumbing. Those are good jobs that pay decent money. Chris was looking at her like she was speaking a foreign language. You really think someone would accept me into a program like that? I know they would, Linda said. Especially now. Chris, your story is going to be in the news. You're the innocent man who almost went to prison because of a corrupt investigation. You're sympathetic. Organizations are going to want to help you. I don't want charity. It's not charity, Linda said. It's opportunity. It's what should have been available to you 25 years ago, but wasn't. Better late than never, right? Chris sat back in his seat processing this. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it, Linda pressed. Say you'll at least look at the options. You deserve a chance to build a real life, not just survive. Okay, Chris said slowly. Okay, I'll think about it. I'll look at what's available. Good, Linda smiled. And Chris? I want to stay in touch this time. Real touch, not just running into each other at the courthouse. I owe you that much. We owe each other that much. Chris smiled back, and this time it was genuine. I'd like that. I'd really like that. As Linda walked back to the courthouse later, she thought about the strange way life worked. 27 years ago, she and Chris had made a promise to escape their circumstances. She'd done it by going to college and law school. He'd done it by sacrificing his own dreams to save his family. Both paths had been hard in different ways. Both had required courage and strength. Maybe their story wasn't over yet. Maybe there was still time for both of them to find the future they'd dreamed about on that rusty swing set all those years ago. 6 months had passed since the charges against Chris were dropped, and Linda was sitting in her courtroom on a Friday afternoon when her clerk told her there was someone waiting to see her. She finished up her last case of the day and walked back to her chambers, wondering who it could be. Chris was standing in her waiting area, wearing a dark blue uniform shirt with a patch on the sleeve. He looked different, healthier. He'd gained some weight, his face wasn't as drawn, and there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Hope, maybe? Chris, Linda said, surprised. Is everything okay? He broke into a huge grin. Everything's better than okay. I wanted to show you something. Do you have a few minutes? For you, always. Come on in. They walked into her office, and Chris pulled out his phone, scrolling through photos. Remember that program you told me about? The one for job training? Of course. Look, he said, turning the phone to show her. It was a certificate. I finished the HVAC technician course. 12 weeks of intensive training. I learned how to install heating systems, repair air conditioners, work with commercial refrigeration units. All of it. Linda felt warmth spread through her chest. Chris, that's amazing. I'm so proud of you. There's more, he said, practically bouncing with excitement. I got hired. A company called Reliable Climate Control brought me on full-time. Benefits, retirement plan, everything. I'm making almost twice what I was making at the warehouse. That's wonderful. And I got my own apartment, Chris continued. Nothing fancy, but it's clean and safe, and it's mine. No more living in that efficiency with the broken heat and the leaky ceiling. I even have a spare bedroom where my sisters can visit. Linda felt tears prick her eyes. I'm so happy for you, Chris. You worked hard for this. I couldn't have done it without you, he said seriously. You didn't just save me from prison. You gave me a reason to believe I could be more than what I'd become. That's a gift I can never repay. You don't need to repay anything, Linda said. Just keep moving forward. That's all I want. Chris sat down in one of her office chairs. Actually, that's kind of why I'm here. I want to do something. Something to help other people who are in the situation I was in. What do you have in mind? I've been talking to some people at the community center in our old neighborhood, Chris explained. You know, where we used to play basketball after school? They're still around, still trying to help kids. And I thought, what if we started a mentorship program for young people who are at risk of dropping out or getting in trouble? People who could use someone to show them there's another path. Linda leaned forward, interested. Tell me more. Well, I was thinking I could share my story. Not to scare kids, but to show them that even if you make mistakes or life gets hard, you can still turn things around. And maybe we could connect them with resources, help them stay in school, introduce them to trade programs like the one I did, give them options. That's a beautiful idea, Linda said. I was hoping you might want to be involved too, Chris added. I mean, I know you're busy with being a judge and everything, but maybe you could come talk to the kids sometimes. Show them what's possible if they keep pushing forward. Linda didn't even have to think about it. I'm in, absolutely. Over the next few months, they got the program off the ground. They called it Second Chances, which Chris said was cheesy but honest. They started with just 10 kids, teenagers from the old neighborhood who were struggling in school or had gotten into minor trouble with the law. Chris met with them once a week, talking about his experiences, helping them with job applications, teaching them practical skills. Linda came in once a month to talk about education and the legal system, answering questions about how to navigate the world when you came from nothing. The local newspaper caught wind of what they were doing and ran a story. It included the full account of Chris's wrongful arrest and how Linda had fought to uncover the truth. The article went viral online. Suddenly, Chris and Linda were getting calls from other communities wanting to start similar programs. But that wasn't the only ripple effect from that day in Linda's courtroom. Pete Gallagher, the pawnshop owner, had been convicted of insurance fraud and filing false police reports. He'd lost his business and served 9 months in jail. The insurance company had recovered their money, but Gallagher's reputation was destroyed. Detective Webb had been promoted after his honesty about the flawed investigation. He'd been put in charge of a new unit focused on reviewing old cases where there might have been mistakes or misconduct. He'd already helped free 2 other people who'd been wrongly convicted. Councilman Rodriguez had lost his re-election bid after questions about his involvement in the case. A new councilwoman had been elected, someone who'd grown up in the same neighborhood as Linda and Chris and actually cared about the people there. And Patricia Delgado, the prosecutor, had started a program in her office to review evidence more carefully before filing charges. She'd hired additional staff and implemented new procedures to make sure what happened to Chris didn't happen to anyone else. One evening, Linda was at the community center, helping Chris set up for their weekly meeting with the kids when her phone rang. It was Kevin Chen, the young public defender who'd represented Chris. Judge Morrison, he said, his voice excited. I wanted to tell you something. I just won my first trial, a case that I would have pleaded out 6 months ago, but I actually investigated it properly this time. My client was innocent and the jury agreed. Linda smiled. That's wonderful, Kevin. I'm proud of you. I learned from watching you, Kevin said. You taught me that it's worth fighting even when it's hard, even when it seems like nobody cares. So thank you. After she hung up, Chris looked at her questioningly. Good news? Very good news, Linda said. Just more evidence that doing the right thing matters even when it's difficult. The kids started arriving for the meeting. There was Tyler, a 16-year-old who'd been caught shoplifting but was now working part-time and pulling his grades up. There was Ashley, a 15-year-old whose mom was in rehab, and who was now living with her grandmother and talking about going to college. There was Ramon, a 17-year-old who'd been in a gang but had left and was now enrolled in an automotive repair program. All of them were works in progress, just like everyone else. But they were trying, and they had people in their corner now, people who believed in them. As Chris started the meeting, Linda looked around the room. This was the same community center where she and Chris had spent so many afternoons as kids, dreaming about better lives. The building was old and worn, the paint was peeling in places, and the basketball hoop outside still had a bent rim. But inside these walls, something important was happening. Young people were learning that their circumstances didn't have to define their futures. After the meeting ended and the kids left, Chris and Linda locked up the center together. They stood outside in the cool evening air, looking at the neighborhood around them. It hadn't changed much. The same apartment buildings, the same corner stores, the same streets they'd walked as children. You ever think about how different things could have been? Chris asked quietly. If you hadn't been the judge that day? If you just recused yourself like you were supposed to? I think about it all the time, Linda admitted. I broke rules, Chris. I put my career at risk. I probably shouldn't have done what I did. But you did do it, Chris said. And look at everything that came from it. I got my life back. Those kids in there have mentors now. The police department is reviewing cases. That prosecutor is being more careful. Even that young lawyer is doing better work. All because you decided to fight for what was right instead of what was easy. Linda thought about that. She'd spent her entire career trying to be a good judge, trying to follow the rules and be fair. But sometimes, she'd learned, justice required more than just following the rules. Sometimes it required courage. Sometimes it required looking at the person standing in front of you and really seeing them, not just as a case number or a defendant, but as a human being with a story. We did good, didn't we? She said softly. Yeah, Chris replied, smiling. We really did. And you know what? I think that promise we made on those swings when we were kids, we finally kept it. Both of us, we got out. Maybe not in the way we expected, but we made it. Linda looked at the rusty swing set across the street, still standing after all these years. She thought about two kids sitting there decades ago, dreaming of a better future. They couldn't have imagined this, couldn't have known the paths their lives would take, couldn't have predicted that they'd find their way back to each other in the most unlikely way possible. But here they were. Different than they'd been, scarred by their journeys, but still standing. Still fighting. Still believing that tomorrow could be better than today. And that, Linda thought, was what second chances were really about. Not erasing the past or pretending bad things hadn't happened, but having the courage to keep moving forward anyway. To keep trying. To keep hoping. To keep showing up for the people who needed you. Come on, she said to Chris, let's go get dinner. My treat. You always say it's your treat, Chris laughed. That's because I'm a judge and you're an HVAC tech who just started 6 months ago. Linda shot back, grinning. Give it a few years and you can treat me.